So imagine this. Cloud Strife and the crew are on a casual midnight stroll throughout Midgar after a successful avalanche operation, when suddenly he is struck with an intense hunger. The Genova cells in his body begin to show him visions of retail worker Sephiroth in a way to manipulate his fated path down the road of the Golden Arches, eventually deciding to get his crew together so that they can go get a couple of stomach-filling and delicious treats at an affordable price. Thus, they ascend the stairs to the upper deck of Midgar, and they keep ascending. And they're still going. But they finally reach Sector 7's own famous McDonald's, which is a cultural landmark that has been part of Midgar's history since the beginning, and I'm sure nothing bad will happen to it. Though, only after ordering does Cloud realize that the menus up here aren't written out in the traditional gil. Instead, there's some foreign currency that he hasn't heard of before, and now he has to figure out how much gil does it cost to buy a Big Mac.
納得バリュー今度はポテベリチーズバーガー99円18日からマクドナルド
So, before we can fully address the question itself, we need to understand quite a few details about Final Fantasy VII's world as a whole. Firstly, we need to know exactly what a gil is. As well, we need to know if there's anything that we can purchase in Final Fantasy VII that we can do so in real life as well. And then finally, we need to know what year Final Fantasy VII seems to take place in. This way, we can not only determine a more accurate exchange rate of gil for money, but also determine how much a Big Mac would cost in general. As well, I should address that I will be tackling both Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake separately for key reasons that you'll see later. As well, I will be converting directly into USD, mainly because it's just the currency I'm the most familiar with. As well, much like I've done before, I won't be using any products that are clearly inspired by ones in Final Fantasy unless they have the exact same effects. An example of something like this would be the potion or elixir energy drinks. Because if I were to jump off a bridge and break both my legs, neither of these drinks would help get me up again. I'd just be more energetic about my pain. Whereas if I did the same thing in a Final Fantasy setting, nothing would happen. There's no fall damage in Final Fantasy. I've seen it with my own eyes, so you can't prove it. As well, in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, we do see the exact potion energy drink in-universe that was sold in real life, which might seem to you like a perfect solution for our second problem, but this said energy drink not only shows healing properties like the magic drinks of other settings, but also is not available for purchase, so we wouldn't be able to determine anything from it. Which, speaking of purchases, let's begin to discuss the history of gil itself. Now, gil is a currency that has been around since the original Final Fantasy, at least according to the Japanese versions of the games, which has its name seemingly inspired by the Japanese pronunciation of guilder, which is an English word for the Dutch and German currency of gulden or florin, which was sometimes nicknamed as the Golden Penny, and was originally given its name by the Holy Roman Empire in the 13th century, and became such a predominant currency that any form of coin trade at the time could be referred to as a gulden or guilder. This is why Final Fantasy likely uses its term, as a way to give its currency a unique appearance without just defaulting to the general GP or gold that we see in other RPGs. Now, while some games have tried to justify the term gil in-universe, such as Final Fantasy IV by having it be named after the currency's founder of Gilbert in the Kingdom of Damcene, or describing where they come from, like in Final Fantasy XI, where they explain how the minting process for gil works to avoid counterfeiting. Sadly, in Final Fantasy VII, there is no real information on the minting or origins of gil in its universe, with the only real example of coins appearing in Final Fantasy VII being through the throw materia when you choose coins, which is Final Fantasy VII's version of the classic gil toss move usually attributed to the samurai job, which it itself is a long-running reference to a classic Japanese character of Zenigata Haiji, which is a police officer from the Edo period who would capture his targets by throwing money at them. And thus, the coins shown in the attack are likely just a callback reference to that, as the gil takes the shape of large silver coins with holes in the middle of them, very similar to that of classic Japanese currencies such as mon or some yen coins, similar to the type that Zenigata would have thrown himself, which of course leads to some questions. Are these coins supposed to be a representation of gil, or are they just a reference to Zenigata? And according to Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, the latter is actually true, as the the coin toss seems to take on a completely different appearance, being a solid gold coin when Zack hurls them in a shotgun-like pattern. This remains true for the Crisis Core remake, and seemingly Final Fantasy VII's remake as well, but that's assuming that Chocobo Sam's trick coin is a trick Gil coin or not. Which, speaking of coins in Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rufus Shinra also introduces an interesting problem, as during his boss fight, he produces a set of coins which he uses in said fight. These, as well, could be Gil coins, but they're silver in color and markings suggest that they are a completely different form of currency. Let's say Shinra bucks for now. This currency, if it exists, is likely used exclusively by those in the upper city of Midgar. The reason I believe this is because if we actually look at upper city and lower city prices, there is a staggering difference in how everything is laid out, with the upper city prices actually resembling a lot of USD prices, or are just so drastically smaller denominations, I doubt that there's an accurate way to measure it using the same currency. For example, in Tifa's bar, 7th Heaven, you can get a cup of coffee for 250 gil, while coffee from a bar in the upper section of Midgar costs roughly 1.3 or likely 1.30 of the upper city's currency. The reason I say 1.30 is that the same sign also lists an apple pie for $4.99. These signs are clearly not marked in gil, as it does not match up with any of the traditional prices that we see in the game, or even inside the Shinra-owned potion brand vending machines, which also take gil. And because of the strange discrepancy with gil's prices, I've opted to cut the prices from the upper city out of the discussion, but I am curious if the Shinra coin will have any correlation with our final findings. Now, next we must determine the year in which Final Fantasy VII takes place in, which, thanks to many supplementary materials involved in Final Fantasy VII, is actually rather easy to figure out. And given that McDonald's has officially recognized Cloud before in the past, let's use him as a reference point, as according to Final Fantasy VII's Ultimania Omega, as well as the Final Fantasy VII Remake's Ultimania, Cloud Strife was born August 11th of 1986, which not only confirms the 12-month cycle that we have in our world, but also calendars in the game suggest that there is a similar 7-day structure to the week. Thus, I feel that there is enough correlation between how time is measured there and how time is measured here to work under the assumption that Cloud was born in a similar but parallel 1986 to that of our own. Now, Cloud was also confirmed to be 21 during the original events of Final Fantasy VII, which also occurred during the month of December to January, at least according to information from multiple anniversary companion pieces. With this in mind, the original Final Fantasy VII's events would take place between late 2007 to early 2008 in our time, and thus the same would be true for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which with this information, it makes it a lot simpler to grab accurate data of the cost for items that would both be in our world and theirs, as well as the price of a Big Mac that we'd be working with. Though the comparison items will be different between Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I'll start first with the original Final Fantasy VII. Now, because of the game's age, it doesn't have the same visuals that the remake does, and it's really hard to find pricing of anything in the overworld outside of the items that you purchase within the game itself, which the first thing you might think to use then would be that of tents, which would work if not for one clear issue about tents in Final Fantasy. The characters clearly eat them afterwards. I mean, how else do you justify the tents just being destroyed after one use? I doubt that the eco-terrorists would be polluting tents all over the world, but with tents out of the question, we aren't left with much, as a lot of the items you can purchase are very magical or weapons with no real correlation. Though, much like how she'll be our savior in the remake portion of the video, Tifa will lovingly carry us out of this problem in her glove-adorned arms. These gloves, for instance, being her work gloves, specifically. As within Final Fantasy VII, there exists a series of joke weapons per character, which resemble a number of different real-world items. Like, for example, Aerith has an umbrella, and if you're wondering why I'm not using that as a reference point, you actually can't buy the umbrella like other joke weapons in the game. It is given to you as a reward within the Golden Saucer. Yet again proven to me that Tifa is the superior girl. Though, back to her gloves. These work gloves are based off the standard cotton gloves often seen in use during hard labor jobs like construction or for gardening. And this weapon can be purchased after the player unlocks the Highwind by speaking with the lower Junon Materia shopkeep, and they cost around 2,200 gil, which means we just need to find the cost of a similar pair of cotton gloves in our world from 2007 to 2008. And After a lot of searching, me and my friends were able to find an archive of Sears' Black Friday catalog from 2008, which lists the price of a similar pair of cotton gloves for roughly $10 per pair. We weren't using the Black Friday price there, that would be $2, but that would not work for this specific measurement. We could say that $10 is roughly equivalent to 2,200 gil, which is actually pretty simple in a conversion rate. That means that $1 USD is equivalent to 220 gil. Now, unfortunately, the Final Fantasy VII Remake does not have the luxury of Tifa's gloves. But also, we have a greater access to a variety of prices through her 7th Heaven bar, as the menu within the bar is marked with prices for a good number of products. Now, you might argue, why am I not just using the hamburger as an example? Well, knowing my luck, this is actually a hamburger steak, as it's right next to the steak product, and thus would not be equivalent to the stomach-filling McDonald's Big Mac. I also wanted to find something that was available both in the upper and lower sections of Midgar, that we could buy in our world right now at a set price. And what I came to the conclusion was something you've actually already heard me talk about, this being coffee, as coffee is a pretty common purchase across the world, and you can get yours from 7th Heaven for 250 gil. And luckily, due to the popularity of coffee in our world, there's a lot of information tracking coffee prices throughout the years. I even found one that was divided into the 4 fiscal quarters throughout 45 years of time. So, looking at 2007's 4th quarter coffee prices, we can see that the cup of joe ran the average person around $1.36, which means, after plugging these numbers in, we can get about $1 is equivalent to roughly 184 gil in Final Fantasy VII Remake. And with that said, I think it's extremely fascinating that this price matches up very well with the upper city prices that we see in-game, as according to these signs, the 1.30 Shinra bucks for a coffee is very similar to that of the $1.36 that we pay in the real world around this time. You might even be able to argue that there's a 1-to-1 conversion rate between USD and Shinra dollars. But that doesn't matter so much right now, because now that we have these two conversion rates, we can finally successfully purchase our Macs. So, according to the Big Mac Index, we see that the Big Mac on average costs roughly $3.41 in 2007, or $3.57 in 2008. I'm going to be converting using the higher price just to make sure that they could have covered the cost of a Big Mac no matter what time period they bought it in Final Fantasy VII's main story. This resulted in a Big Mac roughly coming out to 785 gil in the original Final Fantasy VII, and 657 gil in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is a surprisingly expensive item compared to other consumable items within the world of Final Fantasy VII, such as a potion or even a high potion. Though, McDonald's is also sometimes referred to as the Golden Arches, right? So what if the party didn't get their Big Macs at Midgar? What if instead they went to the Golden Saucer? Well, that would raise a problem in and of itself, as due to the Golden Saucer's function, you don't use gil there. Instead, you purchase things with a series of points, one of these points being GP, which can't be bought directly and must be earned. Though, there is one merchant who will exchange it, as if you enter and exit the Golden Saucer a couple times, a man will spawn, and he will offer you 1 GP per 100 gil you give him. And if we plug this conversion rate together with our other two, we can see that in the original Final Fantasy VII, 1 USD is equivalent to roughly 2.2 GP, while in Final Fantasy VII Remake, $1 would be equivalent to roughly 1.84 GP, which means that the Gold Saucer's prices for Big Macs, assuming that the 2008 costs remain the same, would roughly be 7.8 GP for 1 Big Mac in Final Fantasy VII Original and 6.6 GP in the Remake. This is also assuming that the Remake has a 1-to-100 conversion rate for gil to GP, but that's just speculation for me at this moment. But knowing how Dio runs the Golden Saucer, you can probably round these up to 8 and 7 GP respectfully. But with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video. Gil is one of those currencies that I wasn't fully sure how I would tackle, as it's been interpreted in a lot of different ways, and I might go back and try to convert it from every Final Fantasy game in the franchise, but Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is on the horizon, and I've been really getting back into 7 itself, so I felt this was a fun way to relook at the worlds of both games to get me prepared for whatever Rebirth throws our way. As well, this video is part of a series called Fantasy Currency that I like to do, and if you have any recommendations for any other currencies that you want to see me cover, feel free to leave a suggestion below in the comments. And thank you for watching. If you want to support more videos like this in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep the channel flowing as smoothly as it does. And if you wish to avoid the ghost of retail worker Sephiroth, well, you can do so by buying a copy of Shimonetta, A Boring World with the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimonetta.com.